My Aunt Rachel lived down with the Waodani for 36 years until she died in 1994. My dad, they had gotten in touch with my dad, and so he flew down for the funeral. After the funeral was over, Grandma Dawa came to my dad and said, "Baba, we say that you now come and live with us." My dad said, "No, it's not possible." See, my dad was involved in business and he was busy. There were a lot of things going on. He said, "No." He said, "I'll hire somebody to come and live with you and I'll visit you often." And they said, "No, we want you to come down." And then took it a step further and said, "Nemo said that you would come."
She hadn't told me.
And so my dad pulled out his book of tricks. What we as North American believers often do. He used the prototypical excuse. He said, "I'll pray about it." Grandma Dawa turned to the people. She said, "People, I have already talked to Wangungi, the Creator God. I know that He sees it well." So then he used the second best excuse that he could come up with. He said, talking to Wangungi, the Creator God, and talking to Ongin Kamo, that's my mom. He knew he had them there. See, my mom was in Florida, and there was no way to communicate from the Amazon rainforest to Florida. And even if they had that way of communication, they didn't speak the same language. He knew he had them. Grandma Dawa turned to the people again, and she said, "People, Ongin Kamo being a God follower, if God sees it well, how can she see it any different?" So in 1995, I had just graduated from high school. Our family moved down to live in the Amazon. But you see, this was not going as missionaries. We were going as family. And when we had asked the tribe, "What do you want us to do?" they said, "We don't want you to do anything. Foreigners are always coming and doing for us. We want you as our family to come and teach us to do for ourselves so that we as God followers can go and reach our own people with the good news." Isn't that cool? This organization that we work with, that my dad started, was really the Waodani's idea. But before we go into that, talking about ITEC, the Indigenous Peoples Technology and Education Center, this story was made into a movie. And as God often writes different chapters of our lives, sometimes He makes sense of those chapters in very different ways. Pop, as the movie company was going to be making this into a movie, and your dad had promised you that he was going to teach you how to fly and how to repair and fix airplanes. Now these two things seem very different, but why don't you bring those two things together and tell us how God made good on your dad's promise to you.
Well, Jamie, when I finally came to the States, I was born and raised in Ecuador. In fact, I'm an Ecuadorian citizen. I have a red passport and a blue one. The blue one because my parents were born up here, the red one because I was born down there. But I came up here and went to college, and I was looking in the want ads because I would buy a car every time there was a vacation. I'd fill it full of students, and I'd drive them someplace they wanted to go, and then I'd work on that end, and then I'd come back. That's how I was paying for college. And then it occurred to me one day I was looking through the want ads, and I saw that airplanes were available for sale too. So I figured, hey, that'd be a cheap way to learn to fly. So I went out and bought my first airplane for $2,200. Trust me, when you pay $2,200 for an airplane, you fix it a lot more than you fly it. So I had been flying around, and I found out that if you'd land in farmers' fields or on the country roads, people would invite you in and feed you and then send food home to the dorm with me. And I found out that on weekends, I could get friends to tell other kids in school that I had an airplane that I'd take them for rides. So they'd come and ask me if I'd take them for a ride, and I'd say, well, nah, because if we drive all the way out there and then you get scared, then we have to park the plane and come back. And they'd say, I promise I won't get scared. But if you pull up into a stall, about the time that it starts spinning towards the ground, people would be offering me I'd say, if you get scared, then you got to pay me $10. But people would be offering me $20. I could usually make about $80 on a good Saturday. But when it came time to make the movie, I was trying to imagine, first of all, where they were going to get a plane like Dad's, because there was a Piper PA-14, and those of you who are pilots probably have never even heard of a PA-14. A 16 and an 18, yes, and a 20, but not a 14. A 14 was called a family cruiser, and that's what Dad was flying down there. And they are very, very rare. They only made 237, but that was closer to the Wright brothers' first flight than to today. So they finally called me and said, hey, Steve, we're having a hard time locating a plane like your dad's. And then they asked me if I would find a plane and oversee the rebuilding so it'd be just like Dad's. And then I started wondering, I wonder who's going to get to fly that plane in the movie and get to land on the sandbar and fly it over the jungles and do the bucket drop. And you know what? It had to be a stunt pilot from the Screen Actors Guild in order to qualify for the movie, except that no stunt pilots in the movie industry wanted to fly a 1947 plane down in the jungles in Central America in the movie. So guess what? They asked me if I would be the stunt pilot, and I said I would pray about it. Yes. So I got to do all the... And you know what? I remember landing on Palm Beach in the movie. If you've seen the movie, it was only 400 feet long. Dad's beach was 600 feet long, but the guys making the movie, they knew that they wanted the plane to have to slide onto this little beach, but they didn't. When I asked them, how long is it? They said, oh, it's pretty long. And I said, they make these little ribbons, and they have markings on them. Would you tell me how many markings there are on that beach? And they said, oh, don't worry about it. It is pretty long. It was 400 feet and then had trees at the end, so you couldn't go around. But when I landed on Palm Beach in the movie the first time and taxied back, and, you know, my adrenaline was really going, and a friend who was in the movie team making the movie, he said, Steve, I've heard you say that you never got to fly a plane like your dad's. He said, you just landed on Palm Beach. And I thought, isn't that incredible that all these chapters later that I got to be the pilot recreating Dad's flying down in the jungles. God does stuff like that. It was really exciting.